Welcome to the Corp Eh Diem podcast, where we speak with Canadian entrepreneurs. My name is Dominic Kingston, and I'm your host. I'm joined today with Leah Lavoie, my co-host.
Today, we had the pleasure of talking to Luis Antonio Diaz, who is a strategic planner, AI tool developer, procurement expert dedicated to advancing digital accessibility for disabled and neurodiverse communities. As a founder of Blü Creative, he led the creation of Neuro AI, an award-winning AI-powered web accessibility tool recognized for making an inclusive digital experience more achievable for organizations worldwide. Luis brings over a decade of experience, bridging technology and governance. He has advised Quebec government ministers and held key procurement and advisory roles at the United Nations and the International Civil Aviation Organization. His deep understanding of public sector compliance and digital transformation has made him a trusted voice for institutions modernizing their operations through AI-driven innovation. In addition to his corporate and government work, Luis is a graduate-level instructor at McGill University, where he mentors emerging leaders in strategic communications and digital strategy. A frequent international speaker and recognized thought leader, he has been honored with multiple awards, including the Technopreneur of the Year of the Global Recognition Award in 2024. Luis continues to pioneer AI-driven tools with the launch of their new AI model, Offerio AI, an AI-powered proposal generator for small businesses, and the full Offerio AI suite for government and enterprise users. These products continue to shape the future of data sovereign, inclusive digital experience, and workflow automations. Let's get into the conversation. Welcome to the show, Luis. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Super excited to see both of you, Lee and Dom.
And Luis, welcome to the show. I had the pleasure of meeting you in Calgary during the Stampede. What captivated me was that you're building North America's first business-specific AI model. So why that, and why not just settle for what Google or ChatGPT has?
It's a very interesting question, and I like that we're going straight to the meat of things. Foreplay is not needed here. Uh, let me start with a story. When I came back to Blü Creative, and that's the story that we'll probably touch on later, I realized that we had a big challenge at our company. Our company does a lot of RFPs, requests for proposals, for people who don't know what that is. So it's government tenders. It's about 90% of its business from government tenders. And so the number one challenge that we were facing was, I don't see a lineup of, grad students coming out of college, university saying, hey, I want to be a proposal writer. I want to write tenders. That does not exist. And so having a great team of AI specialists at the company, I said, hey, this is a problem. This is an applied problem that we can solve. And so we put our minds and our expertise to building a tool that could help companies like ours answer proposals to government tenders without it taking so much time, because our proposals would take about 160 hours plus. So we were doing
Wow.
one a month, maybe one and a half a month. Um, Lo and behold, and I'm sure you're gonna have questions for it, but I'll jump to the end of the story. One of those like choose your own endings type books. But uh, as we're entering the phase where we're in now, we've realized that we wanted to build a wheel, but we built a car to put the wheel in it. So what we did is we built an engine out of our own AI model that understands business and business processes as well as government processes. So at the present time, it can understand over 65 different types of corporate documents from which it'll actually understand, learn, and the technical term is vectorize. So imagine Dom, you go to sleep and I erase your memory and then I just feed you 10 things and that's all you know the minute you wake up. Well, that's what we're doing with AI. We're vectorizing the data. So it's a step above from what ChatGPT and Gemini and all those LLMs are doing, because what they do is they skim data. And again, for any techie that's listening out there, I'm being very general. I can go into technicalities, but I'm being very general. So it kind of skims your data when you go through the public available LLMs. And what we needed was something that provided an accurate source of truth. I needed something that would understand the company, would become the company, would only talk about the company, would not make stuff up like ChatGPT has a tendency to do, and would tell you, hey, you're asking me a question I don't know about. So how about you give me some more information? So we'd create a gap analysis on the data that it had in order to become smarter.
So
So
it just
now,
doesn't just make stuff up in that case. Like
Well,
it'll know when
absolutely.
it knows when it doesn't know in that case.
Correct. And it says, listen, I have no idea what you're talking about. I need more training.
Mm.
And so at that point, um, the LLM now becomes a reliable partner in business processes. And that's what we call it set up in a closed loop. So it's in a private server. The data is not shared publicly. It doesn't go to some server in Cupertino or wherever ChatGPT is based out of. And it doesn't use your data to train public models because there's this belief that I truly believe in it as well, that there is IP seepage when you're giving data to ChatGPT, which is the
Mm.
reason why a lot of government offices are talking and implementing policies where, public officers cannot upload personal identifiable information or even contracts to a ChatGPT model. Because a lot of people in the government space will be like, why do I have to review these two contracts? I'm just going to upload them to ChatGPT and say, hey, compare and contrast, tell me the gap difference. ChatGPT is great for that. I mean, it'll do a very good job unless you're paying the full version of the enterprise, and then it goes really into detail. But what it's actually doing is taking that data and learning from it.
Mm.
And so now this private contract and all the complications and intricacies of that contract are now in the public domain. And when you sign up to ChatGPT, you accept these terms and conditions. So that's the challenge that a lot of people don't understand is, well, why can't I use ChatGPT? Well, you shouldn't. I
Mm.
mean, yes, get recipes, get the top 5 bars in your local area, but when it comes to business and when it comes to government operations, um, they have a responsibility to keep the data private on both sides, vendor and client, users, residents, etc. And that's where we saw an opportunity and decided to build Offerio, which is the AI model that we have.
So it sounds like you built a tool for your main business being a creative shop to do RFPs, and that tool is so good now it's become its own business unit, would you say,
Yes,
or its own
it's become
offer
its
for
own
sure, right?
business unit, and we are looking at probably down the line, spinning it off into its own entity, just because it is unique enough from our current operations. I mean, Blü Creative is web technology 4.0 agency. We work mostly with government, school boards, public institutions, and what we do is I call it we build websites plus. So it's not just a website, it's not just your regular WordPress. There's automation, there's AI, there's connectivity to third party applications like from Salesforce to QuickBooks to you name it, right? And uh, we're very good in our domain. We're an award-winning agency. We've done a lot of good work on both sides of the border, and part of our services include, hands-on management, or I mean, what I call hands-off management, which means the client has no work to do. We take care of everything. We help our clients, with updates of the website, making sure that their content's up to date, make sure that their IT infrastructure online is working accurately, so that there is no hacks and attacks and denial of services, because we also provide hosting services for them. So that's why we're a Web 4.0 agency. But understanding that AI is not just the future, it's now.
Mm.
We realized that we really had to do a very important shift. So Offerio RFP is our module for proposal writing, but Offerio AI is the engine behind the other products that we have, which is Offerio Pro and Offerio Government. Now, obviously, Offerio Pro is for enterprise, Offerio Government is for government. And I mean, the objective here is ethical AI. We want to 10x people.
Mm.
We don't want people to lose their jobs. We want people to get better at their jobs. And we want people to do less of the boring thing and more become a subject matter expert in their domain. I mean, we all have a job, and 70% of our job is nonsense, and I'm sure we could automate somewhere somehow. Offerio can now do that. And the remaining 30 now becomes your 70%.
Yeah, so when I met you in Calgary being an oil and gas town, which is
Yeah.
a little less government contracts, I think. Yeah, I find it interesting. And so my interest is from entrepreneurs who start one thing and then end up somewhere else. So what kind of captivated me during the conversation was just your kind of history from government to Blü Creative to, I think you were off to some oil and gas meeting to pitch Offerio. So I was just
Yeah,
quite
it was.
captivated by how did you end up there? Like, how did you end up here versus, like, from doing a creative agency? So like, now I understand the story.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started Blue in 2012, it was a different time. Let me regale you with stories of old. When in 2012, the biggest thing in the market was social media, and everybody was trying to get on social media and doing social media management, social media advertising, SEO. Um, Organizations like Wix were starting to come in, WordPress was starting to become a thing. That was 13 years ago. So it seems like not that long ago, and yet it's so far
I
away.
mean, I was 10, so
Um,
that sounds like very long, and I don't remember any of it. No
Well,
offense.
thank you. Thank you for making me feel young. But that was the challenge that back then things were very different. So we started in that space. We started in helping companies, organizations go into the domain of the .com. So go into e-commerce, which was a big thing. Was starting. Shopify was just starting. Another Canadian great. It was just starting back then, and they started the same way. They started by creating their own product for their own. I do believe. Don't quote me on this, but it was skateboard and surf. No, ski stuff. There you go. They were making ski stuff, and none of the e-commerce tools worked for them, and then they built their own. And then they
Mm.
ended up pivoting and selling it to other companies so that they could have their shops online. So that's kind of been a little bit of our journey where we've realized that, hey, um, we're good at what we do, but there's this challenge in the market. And uh, with every, with all chaos, we see opportunity. And
Hmm.
that's where we took our opportunity.
Wow. So I do want to walk back a little bit. You kind of touched on ethical AI. So when we met the other day, you were actually saying the difference between general versus specific AI. So which one, in your opinion, is more ethical, and how has that come into play with Offerio AI, but also with one of your new tools, Neuro AI, which I found super interesting, and it's the first accessibility tool for neurodiverse communities in Canada and the US. So can you tell us a bit about Neuro AI? I know we've already touched on Offerio AI and how it manages to be ethical, but I found Neuro AI super interesting because I'm like, you're directly dealing with a community that you want to protect, and you want to make sure that their data is safe. So which one was built first, and what was the bridge between the two?
Absolutely. So let me first touch the general versus specific. So, and I'm going to tiptoe around this one because this one will probably trigger a lot of conspiracy theorists out there, and
Mm.
with good reason. But uh, the argument in the market right now is that we have enough AI advancements to actually 10x everybody, all humanity, with
Like
specific
today, just
today,
without
as of
going
right
to
now.
is it super general intelligence, we don't have to go to that
Correct.
level. Okay.
Correct. And that's the challenge where a lot of people are pushing technology for the sake of pushing technology. And that super
Mm.
general AI, or artificial intelligence, is what people believe will bring about, the Terminator, the singularity moment where we will now have a challenge of of an entity that thinks faster than us and does things better than us. So that's that argument. Now I don't have, I guess for me that's above my pay grade to talk about that specific subject. I can talk about specific targeted AI because I believe that that's where industry needs to look at. In conversations that I have with industry players and people who just want to get involved, um, there is a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, where it's like, well, but ChatGPT just came out with the new version, and Grok came out with a new version, but does it solve your current business problems? And so that's specific AI, where it's developed for a specific process, for a specific solution that uh, brings solutions to your, let's call it day-to-day problems or your automation issues, etc. And that's where we are right now, where we have enough technology. Now, how we apply that technology differs from company to company. Majority of companies out there are using a connectivity to ChatGPT, or what we call an API, in order to say we have AI.
Mm.
And it's very simple. It's very like, ask me a question, I'll give you an answer. So it's not really advanced, right? It's advanced if we compare it to 10 years ago, But when we're looking at it now, what can ChatGPT do? Can do a lot. But when you put it into a platform, if there is no process behind how it's using AI, it means nothing. It's
So
just
is that
now
sort of when they talk
hyperbole.
about AI wrapper, an AI wrapper? Is that sort of that kind of
Almost. I
the
mean, AI wrappers do more.
okay?
AI
They
is
do.
do. Think of it this way. Um, you have a accounting software, and now you have an AI tool where you can ask it, find me this file. Well, what you just did is used AI to create a better feature for search. Is that useful? 100%. Is it game changing? Probably
No.
not.
Yeah.
But somebody's selling it out there as we have AI in our accounting software.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's more of a marketing ploy more than anything. What you're talking about is a wrapper where the website seems to be doing a lot, but it's basically a front end and it connects to an API to ChatGPT. There is more technology there than in other
Sure.
applications. And when it comes to how we're using AI, Neuro AI came before Offerio, and Neuro AI was a partnership that we did um, where we wanted to test how good our AI skills were. And so because of that, we worked on this project where, and just as a correction, we're the only neurodiverse tool that is Canadian. There is competitors out there that have, equally as good. I want to say ours is better, but I won't start that argument here. Tool, but they're American, they're Israeli, they're European. We're the only one in Canada. And
Yeah.
so, if you're in Canada, buy Canadian. That's all I'm saying.
Mhm.
But
Agree.
the challenge there is as time progresses, we're starting to see a trend in the market. Uh, the size of the population that is considered neurodiverse that is diagnosed is 1 out of 5,
Wow.
but it could be up to 3 out of 5 for the ones that are not diagnosed. And so,
Just for sake of
if I
argument, can
put
you
it
give
in the,
me what's your definition of neurodiverse, just for like
it's not
myself?
my definition. It
Okay.
is an actual established definition. So it's anybody that goes through that journey of neurodiversity, and there's many different aspects. It could be, as I want to say non-complex as ADHD or
I,
ADD
I might fit.
and
I might fit into that
dyslexia.
camp. I think.
Mhm.
So would
You should
I
see, you should see
think.
my desktop. I can't
All
find it. It's so messy. You can't find anything.
well, you know what they say, messy desktop, organized brain, right? So,
Hopefully.
um, and I live by that one. But it's to that level of the spectrum to all the on the other side where we have people who are epileptic, colorblind or daltonic,
Hmm.
who are legally blind, who have cognitive or motor skill impediments. And so that is a spectrum of neurodiversity currently.
Yeah.
And so imagine you're a municipality and your municipality has 100,000 people as a population, and your website is not updated with the latest tools to make it accessible.
Okay.
If you go by the math, 10,000 people in your municipality cannot access your website. So they won't know when garbage pickup is, what community services you provide, where the community center is, what benefits they can bring to their family, tax season details, etc. And if we go by the statistics that are informal, it could be up to 50,000 people in your community that have some sort of neurodiversity. I mean, 3 out of 5, that gives you about 60%. Yeah, so I'm off by 10. So 60,000 people have some sort of diagnosed or undiagnosed neurodiversity. So how does that translate to day to day? If you've ever gone to a website and you're like, for some reason, I can't read this website, it just makes no sense to me. Well, guess what? There's something in that website that's just not vibing with you. You may be or you may not be neurodiverse, but the design of the website is clashing with what you want to see or you want to feel.
Mm.
And so because of that, if you're actually neurodiverse and you're actually, let's call it dyslexic, and you have a non-accessible font, well, guess what? You're not reading anything on that website.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
you're colorblind and there's yellow everywhere or blue everywhere or red everywhere, you're missing out on elements. And
That's
so
a good point.
the truth is, are we as a business community or as a public service, like a public institution, like a government, library, school board, etc., really fulfilling our mission if we cannot connect with 100% of our population?
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
That was the premise of Neuro AI.
Okay.
Wow. So basically, if I'm understanding correctly, it's kind of embedded into a website to make it more accessible. So, like, how would that look like? Is it kind of like a toggle that you press, or it's a menu and you can select, oh, I have dyslexia, this would, tweak it so that I can read it, or whatever other neurodiverse um, diagnosis that you could have, right? That you could go and select and then it can make it accessible to you?
Absolutely. And um, you explained it great. So the tool is in two parts. The first part lives in the back end where it continuously monitors and fixes the website for minor accessibility issues. Those accessibility issues are usually, in the large part, focused on alternative text and tags and area modifications that will allow for keyboard navigation, for screen readers, as well as for other key elements for people that may be disabled. And then beyond that, on the front end, we have a widget that when toggled, which like you said, Leah, allows, I say empowers the user to modify their journey on your website based on their need, be it neurodiversity or not. I mean, I'm years old. I'm not going to say my age, and I want to blame my fading eyesight on computers at my young 20s, and so because of that, when I go to a website that has one of our tools, I just click on a big white cursor, and it helps me see the cursor much better. And those are simple things that when we did a focus group, it was funny. Almost 90% of the people in the room said that tool, that particular part and other parts were very useful, but yet there was only 3 or 4 out of 12 that were diagnosed neurodiverse. So when we looked into it further, it had something to do with fading eyesight, just comfort level, etc.
Just creates good UI in that case. So it's just in general, you'd have good usability, even if you don't have neurodiversity, it could just still have good usability for the site. But it
Of
sounds
course, I mean, we have on our tool, we have features for macular degeneration, so it makes, elements brighter, bigger. It has things for glaucoma. Actually, funny enough, that focus group happened in Edmonton.
Oh,
So
nice.
I was in Edmonton and we did it in Edmonton.
No, that's really cool. I feel like in-person events have been adapting a lot more with, things like low stimulation rooms. Or I've been to concerts where like at the start of the show, they're like, does anyone need a low stimulation kit, with like ear coverings or
Yes.
things like that. So I had honestly, I didn't know that's exactly what Neuro AI did. I think that's super cool. I'd love to see it on more websites. I think that's kind of like the direction that we should all be heading in, as our physical spaces adapt, so should our spaces online, right? Like it only makes sense.
Absolutely. And you know what's funny is that um, usually in Canada, we lead the pack. And for neurodiversity, we're actually falling behind the Americans, which is
Oh,
kind of
wow.
crazy. Yeah, so in the United States, there's something called the American Disability Act, or the ADA for short. Specifically, it's a Section 508 and Title II of the ADA, which now, as of April of next year, will remove the legal protections on municipalities, public institutions, etc. So fire departments, sheriff's office, school boards, etc. And they have to have a web accessibility program, or else they could be liable to penalties, fines, as well as lawsuits from private individuals. And
Wow.
in the U.S., there is a litigious culture. And as we see year after year, the amount of lawsuits from private citizens is going up every year, almost double. Every year, almost double. Because some are legitimate claims, some are just ambulance chasers. Um, in Canada, the tip of the spear is Ontario. They came up with the AODA Act, and as of January of this year, they are supposedly starting to implement fines and penalties. From the information that we've gathered, they're kind of being soft this year, but will double up their efforts next year. And so at that point, you have municipalities that have to start looking at accessibility. You have enterprises that have to start looking at accessibility. And our number one target in Ontario, which is school boards, which we work with a couple, that's where it is because um, if a child is neurodiverse, one out of the two parents is neurodiverse. And so if we're wondering why there isn't enough involvement of parents and schools, it's because they don't have access to that type of level of communication or access to information to feel welcome to be able to join the discourse at that point. And that's what we're trying to do, one website at a time.
Wow.
It's a good mission. It's a good mission.
Thank you. The odd thing is this. Um, Unless you're affected by neurodiversity, it never crosses your radar. And I started noticing more when I started seeing my aging parents, and they have, problems reading content. We've always said that my dad was ADD, never diagnosed, but that's a thing. People of our previous generation, they're like, I'm not ADD, I don't need to get diagnosed, right? Versus now everybody's like, I need to get diagnosed, and there's even false diagnosis
Yeah.
somewhere. I keep on hearing.
Self-diagnosis is huge with Gen Zs, I can confirm.
Correct, and it's like, just call me ADD, right? So seeing that this is becoming more of a open dialogue and conversation, it is the time for organizations and provinces in Canada to be able to start looking at it. I mean, the laws in British Columbia, in Alberta, in Quebec, which you'd believe they'd be stronger, they lack teeth. So I would be on the lookout for that. But not only that, I would also try to be a trailblazer if you're a municipality or a school board. Don't wait till somebody forces you to do it, because the reality is you're there to serve the people. And if you're not accessible, you're not serving anybody.
Makes sense.
Wow. And if we walk back now a little bit, so you said that you started Blü Creative in 2012, so it's been quite a while. Over this past over a decade, what would you say were the couple of years in Blü Creative that were the toughest? Like, was it building it? Was it a couple years in, you kind of just hit a wall? Like, what was a tough time in building that company? Putting you on the
Um,
spot, right?
yeah, no, that's a very good question. The truth of the fact is, very few of the most successful companies in the world started with something and ended with that same something and became multinational players because of that one thing. And I think that's been the journey for Blü Creative. We started in the space of working with more niche markets and trying to bring them online and helping them with digital presence, digital ecosystems, etc. And as we saw, and as we grew, we saw that this was not just a problem in the specific niche markets that we were working in. These problems went all the way up to government. And if anything, government is the slowest mover, particularly in Canada, unfortunately. And so after a couple of pivots, we realized, one, we have to pick a direction for our core offerings, and
Can
then
I,
we can choose industries
can I ask
after.
how long you were in business before that sort of pivot point came up? Like how long were you doing what you were doing before that aha moment
Oh,
was present?
between 2012 and 2015, we pivoted three times.
Okay.
Wow.
We pivoted three times. We had no choice, and we realized, this market has no money. This market thinks they know everything, and they can't do anything. And it was very, very, very funny, very weird. And um, at a certain moment, I took a step back and said, these same issues that I'm seeing with, you know, Joe's Burger and Betty's Cupcakes and, Annie's Couture, um, were the same issues I was facing when I was in government. And I was like, there's got to be something here. And then I remember, oddly enough, this is a funny story. Um, have you ever seen the movie War Dogs?
I have, yeah. With Miles Teller,
And
right? And
correct, yes. And they start doing bids and tenders for guns and bullets, and I'm like, well, heck, I used to do that. That's true. That's how government purchases. And I started doing a deep dive, not from a government side, because that's where I was before, but from a vendor side. How can I get involved? And did a lot of deep dives, took a couple of workshop courses with chambers of commerce. Some were great, some were complete waste of time. But you don't know until you take them, right? And then I realized that this was a very big opportunity for us because there wasn't that many players back then. Back then, we were competing um, with what I like to call Starbucks designers for small business. So, we had an infrastructure, we had an office, we had insurance, we had employees, we had payroll, and we were competing against the one man or one woman show who goes to a Starbucks at 10 a.m. with her
Yeah,
laptop, takes four
with the name
coffees.
Starbucks. Yeah, okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And then just starts creating a bunch of Wix websites, and then we're competing. And they're like, well, I can get my website cheaper here. Why would I have to pay you this amount of money? And so what we realized is we weren't playing the same game. We had to go to a market that appreciated our setup, and that was
Mm.
government, because government needs insurance, needs process, needs policies, needs, bonds at times. We're actually working on a proposal now. Haven't seen one in a while, but it's a small town in the United States, and they need a bond for 10% of the bid that you're going to put. So if it's a $100,000 bond, you have to put $10,000 down. So it's crazy, and so none of the small designers could do that. We could,
So you
and
did
that's
this.
when we went into that
So
market.
no, so it seems like I find it interesting when how entrepreneurs end up where they are, because there's always
Mhm.
every entrepreneur I know has always been successful based on their experience, and that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but to me it seems like you triangulated your experience in government, understanding purchasing, the capability that you had around web design and sort of creative and the agency, and then so okay, we could take this capability and you can see a gap in the market where no one else had, kind of that blue ocean idea, right? No one actually was really in that space. Would that be kind of a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. Right now, if you go into any tender page, there's between 50 and 80 small, medium agencies that are bidding. But when we started bidding in this market, there wasn't many. We were winning quite a large number of contracts. Um, we also have to understand the context where Canada is completely different than the United States when it comes to bidding tenders. So let's put it into perspective. The North American market, when it comes to government tenders, is worth about $3 trillion a year. That's a huge marketplace. Um, the Americans love working in-house. And so if you go to a tender, you'll see opportunities like if you are a veteran-owned company, if you're a minority and disenfranchised organization, if you're women-led and owned, they have by law a percentage of contract values that they have to give to them. It varies, but from what I've gathered, it's about 30%, which means if a municipality or a state has a budget, $100 million, 30 million has to be earmarked to one of these three markets. So they're encouraging the entrepreneurism. Unfortunately, in Canada, it's not the same way. In Canada, we tend to compete with the big players, and so we'll see players that, don't code a single line, but they're accounting agencies or, and I'm not going to name names, but, they're consulting firms who will win the contract and turn around to companies like us and say, hey, we'll give you the contract. We're going to keep 60% off the top just for
Oh,
compliance,
jeez.
verification, auditing, etc. And so in Canada, we seem to see a push for bigger companies, and governments want to centralize the orders. They prefer to work with one provider for many things. They usually like to play with the bigger players, and so you'll see it in the demands for an RFP. They'll ask for things like insurance coverage for $10 million. Well, if you need a liability insurance for 10 million, then you have to have the bankroll to cover it. And so that immediately cuts out, half of the small medium players in the market, or other types of requirements that really make no sense. I remember getting, and again, I'll say the sin, not the sinner, but I got a government agency from Ontario who contacted us, invited us to a bid, and they required a certain specific security protocol test, which we could get for our own entity, and that is no problem, but they wanted it specifically for their process. And that cost was 15, 18,000. But the value of the contract was about 8, 9,000. So why am I going to lose money to
Yeah.
do this contract? Oh, for the benefit and the reputation of working with us. Doesn't work that way. And so that's a couple of the challenges that we're seeing in Canada, which, that was another reason why the whole Offerio RFP came about, is because in democratizing the access to bids, you will make it more competitive market. You will see a more competitive landscape. At the end of the day, that's what we want. And that's kind of the unfortunate position, because we're caught in between two markets. We are a Canadian company that does bids in the US, And at times, what we see is they encourage small, medium businesses to win contracts. They want to give the contracts to small, medium businesses. I don't feel the same way in Canada for the most part. I mean, there's exceptions, and I can't generalize. And there is no quote unquote hard evidence. But when you see the RFPs and when you see the winners, who are always the same, it kind of gives the tell that, you know what, what's going on here.
That's really
We'll need
unfortunate
another
for
call. Yeah.
Canada. You know,
Yeah.
like business as hard as it is, and you'd think if government could help small to medium-sized enterprises get more work and get probably decent margin work so they can scale up, you do increase the overall GDP of the country, right? Like you get more output, I think, by doing that rather than just concentrating power to the few.
Well, and that's the objective, and that's what you want to do, and that's real, I want to say the real open market. I find that the next 8 years are going to be very transformative in Canada. We're going to see which direction we're going to go. We need to go back to basics. We need to go back to understanding and appreciating that, 80% of the population is hired by small and medium businesses. And, we need to focus on that in order to make, Canada what it was before. A country that was strong, a country that had, very stable economy, that wouldn't be pushed around by other markets. And I think that that's where we're at. That's where we're at that, pivotal position where I hope that the powers that be, now that I'm not in government, are trying to do that.
Well, I was going to say we're going to need another call off the mic where you can really name names and give us the real gossip and real tea. But you did mention government, so that is where you started your career. So you're from Quebec originally, right?
I am.
Yeah. So how did you get into government? How many years did you work there? For which, government agencies did you work for or cabinets?
Absolutely. So I graduated university in a time of much upheaval. I did political science with specialization in international relations, a second degree in public policy,
Wow.
and a minor in business marketing. And I was about to graduate, and I graduated without any perspective of work. Soviet Union had crumbled a couple of years ago. Nobody was hiring geopolitical specialists. A lot of my friends were ending up, as border patrol or customs, which they're great jobs, but it's not what I wanted. I wanted to be part of the diplomatic corps. It never happened. They had a hire freeze of about 5, 6 years. And so I was like, what do I do? I'm the result of good mentors and good internships. I had some great professors at Concordia University in Montreal, where through their letters of recommendation, their efforts and my efforts, I was able to get an internship in the Netherlands, of all places, at
Wow.
the United Nations Association of the Netherlands, which organized an annual conference for the youth of the world, where they would provide policy positions that would then be submitted to the General Assembly in New York. So I started working in the educational side of the world very young. It was very funny because I was, whatever, 22, 23, and I'm, supposed to be working with students who are 20, 21, 22. So the dynamic was very weird, but it was very good. It was a very good opportunity, a very unique experience. I was in the Netherlands for a lot of, very momentous situations, and, in the world of politics. I did that for about 2.5 years, almost 3. And then I went to Ottawa at the United Nations Association of Canada, and loved Ottawa, but it wasn't for me at that point. I was a bit too young, I was a bit too single, I want to say. There was just not much to do in Ottawa. And an opportunity came knocking where the cabinet of the Ministry of Immigration and Cultural Communities reached out and said, we're looking for somebody with your profile, with your background, with the multiple languages that you work on, and we need somebody who can be an advisor. And that was one of the coolest opportunities, and one of the first times that I got involved really in more national politics rather than international. It was a great time. It was also a complicated time because I was in Quebec for the reasonable accommodation conversation when they were talking about what is reasonable accommodation for immigrants and what is allowed, what is not. That was the sort of the ground level of the conversation of making Quebec a lake or non-secular province. Um, and yeah, and then did that for a while. Um, Jumped around to a couple of different organizations in, I want to say, in partisan politics at that point. It's natural in Canada to go from government to partisan politics. Um, and then got invited to do a couple of mobilizations at a federal level. So I became a campaign manager at a federal level, as well as a provincial level. So I remember one year, um, we had just finished running an election for the provincial liberals, which was what I was working for in Quebec. And it is the night of the results, and it's 9:30. We're listening to the results, and I get a call, three calls at the same time. I'm like, oh, this must be an emergency. And I pick up the phone. It's like, hey, it's like, hey, so I don't want to hear any excuses. I know the election in Quebec is done. I'm seeing the results right now. Take 3 days off, and I need you to become a campaign manager for these candidates in the Quebec area for, a federal party. And I'm like, call me tomorrow, we'll discuss it. It wasn't even done one, they're already calling me for another. And, unlike American politics where it's like a year or two of campaigning, it's 33 days. And it's 33 days where you're working 18 hours. You're doing door to door and placement of ads and managing and events and rallies. So it takes a lot out of you. And I think that in itself, in such a compressed time period, gave me so much information, so much knowledge, so much understanding to the human psychology as well. Because one of my professors said once, um, political science is a study of the human direction when it comes to politics, but understanding that is like trying to understand the shapes of clouds. It's very ambiguous. And I realized that at an early age, particularly when we have such, polarized voting. In the West Coast we have blue, in the East Coast we have red, in the middle we have polka dot. I like to call it polka dot. So yeah, so it was very interesting. Left for a bit and then went back to the United Nations and I worked at the International Civil Aviation Organization out of Montreal. My job was to work with ministers of transport, coast to coast to coast. My market was particularly South America, so I worked Argentina, Peru, some Mexico, definitely Uruguay, Brazil, and a bit of the United States because of my English. And that's when I first started seeing RFPs, and that's how I started understanding what procurement processes were. Because our task, I worked for technical cooperation. So the Technical Cooperation Bureau was in charge of ensuring that aviation practices are implemented throughout the world in all the participating countries. My division was Latin America and the US, so we had to make sure that there was, air flight control training, security training. Even when I wanted to build a new airport, a lot of governments, when they wanted to avoid corruption or the potential of corruption, they would come to us and say, hey, you be the project manager. So we would issue the procurements, we would issue the contracts, we would issue the whole process. And that was in itself a great opportunity to understand the dynamics of procurement, cash flow management on these contracts, and seeing both sides of the world, vendors and inside the very slow government process.
That's quite the
Wow.
journey to go from basically, it seems like campaign management, which would be marketing, which maybe explains part of how you ended up at Blü Creative, or starting Blü
Yeah.
Creative, to procurement for BRKO, I think, that you'd be working
Okay,
for,
right.
right? So,
Yeah.
that explains a lot of how you ended up where you are, just based on dabbling in all the different buckets, if you will.
So one of the interesting things is, Tom, you mentioned that a lot of what I've done makes up who I've become. I graduated university in a time when things were very core, and now it's a little bit more of the art of the possible. So um, I consider myself a strategic communications expert. That's what I am. my hobby has always been, in the nerdosphere where, I always coded and I always did all that. And that's been my passion since I can recall. And so that's, obviously leveling up through there, that's where we are today. But my academic background has been, the communication side and the strategic planning and the crisis management. And so people say, well, you took crisis management as a degree. Well, it didn't exist when I was in school. And so that's why I did the courses that I did. I did, the international relations, the diplomacy program, and I did public policy, and then I did a grad course in public relations, and then that was the experience equals me today. And I think that if you open your vision and you open your sense, one of my good friends once said, if you're open to the art of the possible, then you're not limited to what's in front of you. And that's what I realized a long time ago. That I needed something, I would go and I would learn it. I would adapt it, I would apply it. And then I would become a subject matter expert in it. And the number one challenge that I find nowadays is I tend to work with a lot of Gen Z and millennials and whatnot. And the best conversation is one where I had recently where I said, this is the standard for whatever, X. And the answer would be, but who determines the standard? What agency did we approach for them to certify this standard? Well, there is no agency that has identified the standard. And when they do it, that's just going to be a money grab. Unless it's something that's highly technical, like engineering or whatnot, there is no standard. And I refer to this, for example, when I hear things like, we're a WordPress certified agency. Who certified you? And I see that a lot in tenders, government offices will be like, we want a Drupal certified agency. Well, a Drupal certified agency goes to get certified at the Drupal nonprofit organization, which works based on donations. So you have to donate $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 in order to get certified. And then you have to give free time to the Drupal organization from your coders to improve on what is supposed to be free software.
Actually, I wasn't aware of that.
And so nobody talks about that, but it was like, we want a Drupal certified agency. You have to be gold certified. Gold certified means you donated $15,000 to the Drupal nonprofit association, and then you donated 1,000 hours of your developers' times in 1 year in order to improve the software. Is that really a certification?
Yeah, exactly. Sounds
Not
like a money
really.
grab.
Yeah.
100%. And that's kind of the challenge where now that we work in a space where we're pushing technology because we're building stuff that hasn't existed anymore, or that doesn't exist, period, not anymore, just doesn't exist, like in artificial intelligence. The challenge is getting people that, one, understand what the art of the possible means, not just verbatim, but what it actually means, and who are encouraged by finding and making things work, even though out of 10 tries, 9 times it will fail.
So
When people come to our,
I have a question
sorry,
about
let me just use the phrase, when people come to our office, I say, listen, I want to hear about the failures, not because I'm going to fire you, it's because that's research for us. And I need to know what failed, because then that makes that success that much more valuable. And we work in a space where technology is changing every week. So
that kind of brings up, I think, two things. Maybe Leah can talk a bit about your COVID experience. But yesterday, they were talking about, let's say, hard times in business. And you mentioned that there's a group that you either belong to or talk to where you have to have 4 things that have had to happen, that you've gone through in life in order to belong. And they're all this hardship based. So since we're talking about hardship and how that frames your perspective on the art of the possible, tell us a bit more about that.
It's not an official group. It's a group that I made with a couple of friends. And the reason why is because in the past I've been working on a small podcast with a couple of business professionals that I've known for years, and also a teacher at McGill University, as I am at the graduate level. And there is one thing that remains true, which is it's lonely at the top. And people who don't see that is because they're not high enough to see it yet. The minute they get to that position, they'll understand. And what do I mean by that? Very simple. Um, if you're married, your spouse, your significant other may love you, but may not understand a single thing that you do. And they will listen out of courtesy, they will listen out of moral support, out of love and passion for your passion. But that does not mean they're going to give you the best advice. Let's put it into perspective. You're an entrepreneur, and as an entrepreneur, every day that you open your office is a risk. A risk of not getting paid, a risk of getting sued, a risk of having staff not show up, a risk of many, many different things. But you're still putting in the labor, you're still putting in the capital. That person is married to a 9-to-5er who wakes up, goes to the office, clocks out at the end of the day, every 2 weeks get his paycheck. Think of how that conversation is going to go if the entrepreneur goes home and says, I had a rough day, darling. I got these guys who don't want to pay. I have this thing and I have that other thing. And so at that point, the challenge is this. You are opening up to your significant other. They want to listen, but what they're hearing is, we're not secure, we're not safe, we're not okay.
Yeah.
And so at that point, the
Doesn't
challenge
create a happy
is,
household.
correct.
Or a
How
secure
much
household
support?
at least, right?
Well, that's it. So how much support can you get? The number one go-to answer is going to be like, quit what you're doing, go get a job,
Yeah.
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 right? And so that conversations go much different if that guy or that girl goes and talks to another entrepreneur who has been through that, who is going through that, who has already done that journey. And so it's not that the advice that comes from the spouse comes from a bad place. It comes from a place of fear, and it comes from a place of unknown, and it comes from a desire to be secure. So that challenge in itself puts a lot of undue pressure on the entrepreneur because now their day-to-day is uncertain and they don't feel like they have the support, even though
Yeah.
the spouse feels like they're supporting them. So who does that person go talk to? And that's why I kind of made this sort of unofficial group of misfits that I call, where, they have to be at the same level. They have to be at the same level. In order to be at the same level, you have to have had one of these four major life-changing situations, and that's what we were talking about. That's what you were mentioning, Don, which is one of them is, have done a very large merger and acquisition or exited in a large fashion one of your startups. That in itself is a huge moment because in a merger and acquisition, well, you're trying to, sift through the BS. You're trying to peel the layers on that onion to understand what makes that business tick and how it's valuable to you. And then all the ups and downs of the legalities of buying that. And anybody that's bought a business can understand that that's not an easy process. When you sell a business, you're detaching yourself from your potential baby as an entrepreneur. And what you think it's worth is not what the world thinks it's worth. Trying to navigate through that journey, trying to navigate through the chasms of failed sales and, do you stay as an employee or do you stay as a consultant or do you just leave? There's so many different dynamics there that happen. The other one is, have you ever been sued? And why does that matter? It matters because we see a lot of television and we think, a lawsuit is a lawsuit, but nothing changes your day-to-day like receiving a bailiff at your house at 10 p.m. You've been served and your lawsuit is for $5 million, $10 million. And now you're like,
What the heck?
holy,
Yeah.
holy camoli, what do I do now? And your first thought is your family, your house, your retirement. What do you do? How do you bring this up to your spouse? That whole conversation of you should have gotten a job will definitely come back to you at that point. And then navigating that journey, and then hopefully you're successful, if you did no wrong to get out of that situation.
That's why you have D&O insurance? Directors and
that?
officers? That's why you would have directors and officers insurance to some degree? Like a bit of a
To a
cover?
certain point. But I mean, depending who you owe money to, they're very sneaky
Yeah.
at circumventing that. Um, and then a bankruptcy. That's a big one.
That's a big one.
Bankruptcy in your baby, bankruptcy in your company. that's a very big thing because it's not only how you shut it down, it's essentially the death of your project and how you cope with that, how you relate to that, and the associated feelings of failure. And how do you, go to your friends, go to your family, go to your networking events and say, hey, the business closed. At that point, you're just saying that you failed.
And I'll do a
And
plug for
that
for
persona that
Corp
you
Diem and
built.
just say, hopefully you're incorporated and you had some shelter. And it wasn't like all personal, right?
Well, I mean, in Canada, it's not that easy compared to the US. In the US, yeah, there's certain shelters in Canada. Um, if you owe money to the government, if you owe
Mm,
money
yeah.
to Hydro, or if you owe money to a utility or a bank, they can still chase you, even personally. So the type of protections that we teach students at university don't really exist in Canada, which makes building a business in Canada that much more challenging, that much more difficult.
Mm.
Um, and so these are things that people don't say. Like I've had tons of conversations with people that say, "Hey, I got a great idea. I'm just gonna write a, business plan. I'm gonna go to the bank." I'm like, "Tell me how that goes, because that's never worked for me. Not in Canada. In the U.S. in smaller markets, it does still work, but not in
Really?
Canada.
Right.
It's basically how much is your net worth? Do you own a house? We'll give you collateral in the house. Here's your loan. Start up your business. But guess what? Your business fails. Your collateral was your house. We want your house."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
on
That's the
that good
challenge.
note, I'm gonna do a rough transition to COVID. Because clearly you're someone who isn't scared of challenges, isn't scared of uncertainty, because while you were building Blue Creative, you took a hiatus to go be COO of W Medica during COVID, correct?
Correct.
So, out of all the kind of positions someone could have during the pandemic, I would imagine that working in medical supplies would have been an insane challenge. How was that?
It wasn't a challenge in the traditional sense. One of the reasons why I joined W Medical was because of the fact that a lot of government procurement was required.
Okay, I didn't make that
So
connection at all. Yeah.
our number one, in Canada, there's only 12 clients for medical, and it's every province.
Wow.
In the US, there's millions of clients. So in Canada, if you're in the medical space, you're selling to your province, to the next province, and maybe to Health Canada. So our job when I joined was to essentially negotiate contracts with Health Canada and or their subsidiaries that were buying for Health Canada, as well as Santé Quebec, and be able to produce for them the products that we were doing, which were essential products for frontline workers. So at that point, the challenge really became managing the scale because, we produce, I don't know, 10,000 units and be like, we want 50. We get to 50, they want 100. We get to 100, we want a million. And you're like, where does it stop, And I remember a couple of my first roles was scaling the company and opening up two other factories. So within
mm,
6 months, or within 3 months, we had three working factories in Quebec. And we were one of the few companies that was actually hiring while everybody else was firing people. I got COVID at the factory. We had to shut down.
oh my
And we
goodness.
got the first instance, the rough one, the one that had no vaccine for it. So I was, 2 weeks totally, sleeping for like 16, 17 hours, waking up, being on the phone for four, and then it was rough. But you know what? It was quite the opportunity.
Rough and scary, especially before the vaccine, putting yourself in the front lines and really fighting, kind of does remind me of a concept you brought up earlier, which is you didn't refer to yourself earlier, sorry, not in this podcast, but when we chatted before, you referred to yourself not as a CEO, but as a firefighter. So,
Yeah.
can you explain that to me a little bit more?
Um, I truly believe that if you're a good leader, if you're a good CEO or COO, you'll never get the accolades. You're not there, and you could take a 3-day vacation and nobody would notice. And that's if you're doing your job properly, because you're there to facilitate other people's work, and you want to make sure that other people are performing, are 10xing, so that the company can meet its objectives. My job is to lubricate all the cogs so that everything works. And so if I'm getting the call, I'm not getting the call because we did something great. I'm getting the call because something's not working, and now we have to go and address it and fix it and essentially that's why I'm a firefighter.
I like that. That would make for a great LinkedIn bio. Firefighter slash CEO.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a great one.
and just to kind of wrap up our conversation, so now you're also working as an educator at McGill. Can you tell me about the classes you're teaching, how you can possibly find time to also teach throughout all the other things that you have to do? Like, what made you be like, I want to give back to the next generation and share the knowledge that I've gathered?
Um, I don't make it a secret when I tell people that I am the result of good mentors, good internships, and a lot of the mentors that I had were my professors. I had some really cool instructors um, who really changed the way I saw the world, and who really made me see things from a different point of view. Um, Back then, we didn't even have social media, so I can only imagine how it is today. And
Mm.
so the challenge I find nowadays is breaking through the noise. Um, I wanted to become a not a full-time professor, but rather a visiting lecturer, and I have a good arrangement with McGill. And the reason for that is because I'm still in industry. And so when I learned the best or the most when I was in school was from professors that were in industry or had made a huge impact in industry. I remember at Concordia, I had a professor who was an Army Corps engineer, and he consulted for the Pentagon as well as the D&D. Um, I had another one who had been part of the United Nations Human Rights Council and all these other things. So I learned not from the books, but from their stories. And that's where the real learning happens. I mean, and that's more evident today, where you can just go on YouTube, you can go to Masterclass, you can go to Udemy or a bunch of other online platforms, and you can get the content of the course. So what really makes a difference between just taking the course online and standing in front of somebody and taking the course is the experience that they bring. And I think that I'm still in a good position because I'm still at the front lines to be able to bring back these and make them almost as case studies. And I think that's where people learn. And what they don't know is that I learn from them, because at the graduate level, these people also come with a lot of experience, a lot of world experience from their own niche markets. And so I get to learn from them, and I get to understand the current trend and the current, generalized thinking. Um, and that's why I do it. I do it for those two. It's an education for me, but it's also because I believe I'm doing a service by not teaching, but by talking about what I've lived through. So
So do you
it's
find
almost
it's the
like
discourse,
therapy.
like it's the
It's
conversations
almost like therapy.
that you're having?
What was
Is
that?
it, do you find it's just the discourse, it's the conversations, that it's that real time conversation, almost like what we're having here. You have a real time conversation that goes back and forth.
Absolutely.
And in that process,
Absolutely.
it's richer than a parasocial, one way where someone's talking to me, but I don't get to talk back to them. So I think we're missing that.
I think that we don't learn the way we used to, and I don't think we ever learned properly back then either, where someone was just talking down to us, and we just write and scribble, and then we just regurgitate all the things that we learned. Um, I remember I went to school in the Dominican Republic. I went to high school in the Dominican Republic, and I went to a private school. I was very blessed to go to an American school down there, and I had a Canadian math teacher, and he got into trouble because we'd go into class, and back then the whole rave was the TI, the Texas Instruments graphing calculator. But people discovered how to write notes in it.
Hmm.
And so what he was doing was he was taking the calculators away from people and not letting them use them during the exam or resetting them. But me and a bunch of, what I colloquially call the Geek Squad, we were able to code the formulas into the device. So we
That's
were able to keep our calculators. And then teachers and parents complained. And he stood up for us and he said, what they did was take the formulas and what they learned and applied it. They didn't copy paste it. It would behoove me to actually penalize them for that. So that's why I let them keep their calculators.
It's
I
And
wish I would
smart.
have
that
known
was
you in
one of
high
the
school. You could have helped me cheat. That would have been so
well, but that was one of the starts for me of wanting to be able to say, hey, you know what? It's not what you learn, it's how you apply it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first moments that I said, hey, it's how you apply things, it's how you can execute them. Well, people have great ideas every day, but getting them, building them, and scaling them, that's where the challenge is.
for sure. Like I started university in 2020. So like during COVID, my first year and a half was like fully online. And as I was actually going into lectures, like in person, the amount of people who have their laptops open and are shopping, they're watching a soccer game, they're watching hockey, they're texting their friends. Like, I find that we really have to like learn how to really pay attention to what's happening in front of us, and our professors also need to learn how to make it interesting enough that we're actively listening. And I find that like guest lecturers, like what you're doing, is also a great way of getting people interested in person. Because like some of my professors in business were like 70s, like they hadn't been in the workforce for like the past 20 years, and they're teaching us about human resources, and I'm like we don't have the same issues now that you guys had like 20 years ago, right? So it's nice to have someone who's actually there in the workforce come in. Like that's always what I found to be most interesting as a student. So it's great that you're taking the time to teach the next generation, and share your knowledge.
I teach one or two classes a year, so it's not much, but I do teach. And you're absolutely right. That was one of the challenges of why, at least at the undergrad, I went to Concordia versus McGill. And McGill had, the reputation, but it had legacy professors. And at Concordia, they had in-industry professors. And my mom till this day is like, you should have gone to McGill. And I was like, hey, I got a better education out of Concordia. I went back to McGill. I got a grad degree out of McGill, and then I teach at McGill, and I love McGill. Um, but at that stage of my life, it wasn't what I needed.
So
Smart
I have
move.
just a random question.
Yeah.
Just because from Montreal in marketing, I know I'm a marketing nerd or brand nerd. So do you know anyone from Sidley? Because if you took Canada and be creative shops, Sidley is like up there for like one of the best agencies in the country, I think. So I'm just curious,
Yeah,
have you run
Sidley.
into anyone from Sidley in your travels?
Of course, Sidley. I've also met people from Taxi. I've also
Yeah.
met people from, oof, yeah, there's a couple of others. Yeah, and I still have friends that work at these agencies as well. Um,
Any learnings
ha-
from them? Like what would you say would make them better agency than others?
I'm probably going to get into trouble for this one, but
We can cut it if you don't
um,
want it.
no, but I mean, what I realized early on was why I didn't want to stay in a creative marketing space for me was, and I wanted to go into more the innovative space, was because the reputation that you build as a professional in the creative space and the benefits that that brings has nothing to do with the agency. Give you an example. Agency one is running a great campaign for Tim Hortons, and they have the creatives there. And then agency two wins next year the contract for Tim Hortons or, God forbid, Dunkin' Donuts when it was in Canada.
Yeah.
They will go and they will poach the creative from agency one because he has the experience and handle the contract from Tim Hortons, and they will pull to the other agency. So at the end of the day, the seniors were always the same. They were getting pulled left, right, and center. So one year they're working at Sidley, the other year they're working at Taxi, and then they got wiser and they just became consultants and contractors. And so they would just get hired, and then the Sidleys and the Taxis and the other agencies would just do the heavy lifting.
Mm.
And they would have a star creative director for that one campaign or for that one contract. But then the bulk of the work was done by juniors. And do they need to go through that boot camp? Absolutely. It's a great boot camp, but nobody's going to last 20 years in that boot camp. So, it's a great school, but a lot of people would leave 3, 4, 5 years after to go to client or to become contractors.
Yeah. Okay.
There's no learning there. It's just more of I like to say, I like to know which way the wind's blowing before I walk into a shitstorm, so I'm not looking straight at it. And if I know what I'm walking into, I know I can make an informed decision. The worst thing is to go into a situation and you have no idea what's happening. But that's only reserved for the people who just graduated. They got to learn somehow, right? So,
I'm listening. I'm listening. But as we wrap up the episode, Lewis, we like to end our episodes by asking our guests three key lessons that you'd like entrepreneurs and innovators to take from your journey.
And
And
only
you can
Oh,
take a
three.
wow.
It
second to
sounds like you
think
have
on
more
it.
than three, but you have to
Yeah.
try and limit it
No,
to three.
I mean, some of them are I guess one of the sayings that I'll say is kind of like people know it, but people don't understand it, I guess, as much. But don't be the smartest person in the room. Number one key thing. If you're building the right team, then you're probably not the smartest person in the room. You're just probably the uh, the person that can I want to say is more effective at doing things. You're not the smartest, but you know how to get things done because you're bringing a whole table of experts that really need to be able to guide the conversation, and you need to be there to facilitate that conversation to get to success. That's the first takeaway. The second takeaway, the art of the possible. I have yet to see that geometry law that my professor was hammering down that I failed so many times, which was the shortest point between point A and B is a straight line that connects them. That does not happen in business, right? And so you have to be very well aware that um, you have to be open to the art of the possible. For me, um, I don't accept the word no at our companies. I just say no is an easy way out. You can say yes, but. Tell me the but, and let's see if it makes sense. But no is not an option. That's
Not
the
in your,
the
not in your vocabulary.
no, and it can't. It can't, particularly in the space that we're in. We're always developing and innovating and pushing the pushing the ante. We have to always find a yes. That's what we get paid for. And the third thing is you're never too old to learn. Um, Particularly now. I mean, most people my age would be like, I'm too old for AI. And the reality is, the cycles are getting shorter and shorter. Before cycles were 40 years and then 20 years and then 10 years, where the technology would change so dramatically that you felt like you had to go back to school or that you had to learn something. Then it was 5 years. Now, 1 year, 2 years tops, where what was technology last year is not technology today. And so you have to have that eternal spirit of wonder and awe and desire to learn, or else you're going to get stagnant and you're just going to get washed away with the currents of change.
Wow, those are
That's good.
great. Honestly, thank you so much. An honorable mention to know which way the wind's blowing when you walk into a shitstorm, because that's definitely going to be one of my top key takeaways from the episode.
That one I learned from politics, where it's like
Mm.
walk into an office, know what's happening before, because
Oh, it's a
so
great
yeah.
one. Well, thank you so much for your time, Lewis, today. We really had a great conversation. Is there anything that you would like to plug for our listeners before we end the episode today?
I'd love to plug Offerio RFP if you're a small medium company that's trying to sort of enter the government tender space. Check it out. It really 10x's companies and organizations, reduces the legwork of having to do proposals, brings proposal creation to a couple of hours, and really increases the opportunity and the chances of being successful. We're all in it together. I'm really a true believer of bringing business away from Bay Street and bringing it to Main Street. And I think that,
I like
by
this.
doing something like this, it's very important to level the playing field and to empower the small and medium businesses that keeps Canada moving on a daily basis to level up and compete. And that's what we're doing at Offerio.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
My
Pleasure having
pleasure.
you on the show, and hopefully we'll get you back here sometime in the not too distant future.
Absolutely, Dom. Hopefully next time it'll be in person.
I hope so too, yes.